The only guys that I knew that didn't struggle at all, mobile home park owners. There's a high demand for affordable housing, and it's a problem. The fastest way to achieve additional affordable housing lots is to buy older parks and reposition them. Manufactured housing, they're not making any more, so it's a scarcity conversation. And if you get a good one, it's irreplaceable.
Welcome back, investor. We've got an episode of Passive Income Adventures for you today. It's the podcast where we talk about all things business, finance, basically how to go on more adventures. And we figure out how to help you pay for it both with the money on the income side and also with the time on the passive side. And so if you're interested in investing and having your money work for you so that you can do work that you really find meaningful, where money's just not part of that equation because the basics are at least taken care of, that's what we spend time talking about on the show. We spent the last 7 years working on our own passive income. We left our jobs 2 years ago, and now we just get to figure out what we think is interesting, do what we think is fun, grow our portfolio in ways that are less stress and less hands-on. And so today we've got Jack sharing his story along those same lines with a 5210, a mobile home park investing firm. So thanks, Jack, for coming in. Introduce yourself and tell us about why you are on the Passive Income Adventure Show.
Thank you for inviting me, Emma. So, my name is Jack Martin. I'm the co founder of 5210. We are a mobile home park investment real estate sponsor based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. We buy large, more institutional quality, like nicer manufactured housing communities all across the United States. We buy them in an underperforming fashion, and then we reposition those, and our investors come along for the ride, and they get cash flow and they get incredible tax benefits. And then of course at the end, they get a nice return on their investment.
Yeah, but you did not start in like you said, you're now buying nicer ones. You did not start with mobile homes or manufactured home communities, and you didn't start with the nice ones. I think that when we were chatting before we opened up, you mentioned something about how everybody starts with the yucky stuff, the cheap stuff, but you had done other asset classes before that too. So you can walk us through what led you up to this specialty and again, like why you started focusing on the nicer, the higher end version of the specialty.
I started out as a young man in development. So I was a general contractor, buying land, like building homes, that kind of thing. And I started to scale that, and quickly that turned into 30, 40 employees, and became like a glorified babysitter. Then I started doing single family rentals, like buying old fixer uppers and fixing them up. And we started in the tough neighborhoods. We were buying the cheap rundown properties and fixing those up. That scaled to about 2,000 single family homes.
Oh, wow.
Most of those we repositioned, just bought them, cleaned them up, and then sold them off to larger. Some of them were like Invitation Homes, which is a subsidiary of Blackstone. But we sold over 10 years, we sold on average 200 homes a year.
Mhm.
Then I got into apartments because I got bored of the craziness of a house. Every 6 hours, we were buying a house, and it was just
Mhm.
nuts. So we got into apartments, and I thought that's where I was going to finish out my career. We did about 1,000 units in total. And then I tripped over this thing called mobile home parks. A neat little story how I got into that space. I was trying to buy a vacant apartment building in a mountain town, Flagstaff, Arizona. So it's
Mhm.
where the college is. It had been vacant for a couple of years, boarded up, and I was like, that's got my name written all over it. The city wouldn't let me bring it back on board as an apartment because it didn't have enough parking. Right next door, there was this little mobile home park. So I bought it for the land. And then, long story short, the city was such a pain to deal with. I ended up owning this mobile home park. That's how I got into the business. So I look back on it now as serendipity. I didn't know the powerful intrinsic qualities of mobile home parks. I looked at them through the stereotype that most people my age did, which is those are trailer trash.
Yep.
But once you fix them up and reposition them, that is the best cash flow of any real estate I've ever owned. So that's was the genesis of the interest. And then when we look back at 2008, and I saw just about every landlord or real estate owner, whether it's commercial or residential, experience a degree of stress. Some got completely wiped out. Some half their portfolio got wiped out. Some just struggled for 5 years. The only guys that I knew that didn't struggle at all, mobile home park owners. Income went up. Their vacancy didn't change. They had more demand for homes in their communities than they did prior to the recession. It was almost like they perform better when things are bad than everything else does. So I saw that happening and I said, okay, there's another clue. And that's what led to the formation of 5210.
Okay. Interesting because we were in Scottsdale all last week at a conference for the institutional due diligence conference. And one of the things we kept seeing was like recession resistant, even some recession proof. I'm like, oh, and everybody was hurting. There's a lot of pain there. They're like, oh, Blackstone is one of our institutional investors, but here they are with a $25,000 minimum for retail investors. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on in this space over here? And so I think it's really interesting. I didn't see, I don't know, I'm trying to think if I saw any mobile home park, maybe one on the institutional size. It was a lot of lenders for, like you said, fix and flips. It was a lot of apartment buildings, a lot of new development, and then some other oil and gas, a few other niche types of things. But I don't know, how has the institutional investment, like you have those relationships, affected this as an asset class, and why there just aren't that many of them? They're not making more. Tell me more about. I don't know. I'm not
Yeah.
asking the question here. I'm just wanting to learn like more about this space at the higher level than just a mom and pop type of owner.
So I wasn't aware of this either before I got into it. Most people aren't. There's about 80,000 mobile home parks across the United States.
Mhm.
Now that includes a lot of little ones.
Yeah.
Well, about half of those are large enough to attract interest of a guy like myself or an institutional buyer. So let's call that 40,000. Shoot, there's probably 40,000 apartments in your market that you're sitting in right now. So it's such a small niche that it's more competitive than you'd think.
Mhm.
It's difficult to get into the industry. There's a bit of a brotherhood or sisterhood. So like almost a good old boys club. If you're not one of the owners, it's really hard to pry in. You certainly couldn't get the attention of a broker unless you're willing to overpay. And then, of course, that wouldn't be profitable.
Yeah.
But over the last 20 years, we've seen this consolidation go from the mom and pop owners were all originally all the owners of mobile home parks were mom and pops. And this goes all the way back to the 70s. And then some professional, like local professional owners would start to buy them and aggregate them, or maybe the offspring of the guy who built it
Mm.
would start to collaborate and buy a couple more and consolidate. But then the big boys got involved. So when institutional capital gets involved, that becomes pretty competitive. Mobile home parks are, particularly if they're well located in a good, strong, like primary or secondary market, that's a covered land play. So eventually the land will be worth more than the park. So most of the assets that have been consolidated or purchased by the institutional owners, and this includes Carlyle and Blackstone and publicly traded REITs, and there's a lot of Warren Buffett is involved. So it's a little niche, but the players that are in the niche own about half of the good quality
Mhm.
assets.
Okay.
So that consolidation will continue. Eventually, the only mom and pops that will own properties will be the offspring that are smart. And you know how that whole second, third generation usually wastes the money?
Yeah.
There's probably going to be a percentage of just really sharp offspring who understand the beauty of the asset class and they just never sell. They take it
Mhm.
from their parents and then they raise their children correctly and they teach them how to run it and it becomes a family legacy owned asset. But most of that, like what we're seeing is that the folks who own it today might be in their 70s, their children don't want it, they have different careers, or they know their children would just blow it, so they sell it instead. And the buyers are either a professional like ourselves or it's institutional players in the marketplace, but it's really competitive, low cap rates, but these are really stable assets once they're about as stable cash flow as you can get once
Mhm.
they're repositioned.
Does it make a difference in the asset class? I'll give you an example. I was in Kentucky a few years ago and I was looking at a really rundown mobile home park that needed, he was asking the same cap rate as one that was in really good condition, where the owner basically sat in the office and passed out fine mornings, like very tightly managed with nice homes and good utilities. And this other one that I was looking at that was not far away needed all the undergrounds redone. It was park owned. It was just a nightmare. And I just remember looking around like a lot of these homes were park owned, but they were uninhabitable,
Mhm.
completely falling apart. And I just remember when I walked into the nicer one to see like what this one would be charging and what were they charging for lot rent and all that, I realized there was no upward movement in the lot rent on the one that I was looking at. But when I first walked in, and there was this little old man sitting there at the desk, and I walked in and chatted with him for a while. Turns out he was the owner. And I just remember thinking, like, there's no way I want to sit here in this office running this mobile home park. Is that what it takes to the degree of being able to keep it nice like this, like a lot of babysitting versus the ones that are hopefully not like the one I looked at, but cheap enough that you can have low quality tenants, people who never have any money and they always have an excuse why they can't pay their rent this month. I draw those distinctions inside of mobile home parks or manufactured home parks as an asset class because you go from super low end meth trailers all the way up to a really nice manufactured homes and well-kept communities with a nice HOA.
Yeah. So first of all, for your audience, let's zoom out just a little bit so that we can appreciate why mobile home parks are so unique. You think that they're like a cousin to the apartment complex. You have 100 people living on the same property, but that's not what they are. If you could imagine a giant parking lot, and instead of parking cars in each space, you park a home in each space. The spaces are larger and they have utility hookups at every space. But the difference between all other commercial real estate where you have multiple residents and a mobile home park is the fact that the tenants own the homes. So they're renting the lot that their home sits on and they pay a monthly fee for the lot rent. And of course, they pay their utilities. But they take care of their home. They do the maintenance to the inside and outside of their home. They have to abide with community rules, which are a lot like HOAs. And as the park owner, we take care of the streets, lighting, landscaping, common amenities like a pool or a clubhouse and those kind of things. If the tenant doesn't pay their rent for the lot, the penalty is the forfeiture of their home.
Mm.
That's the unique thing about mobile home parks that few people are aware of. So if you compare that to any other rental product, if somebody doesn't pay the rent, you evict them and they don't get their deposit back. In a mobile home park, they get evicted and they don't get their home. You do. So now you fix it up and sell it to the next resident and off we go.
I'm sorry, is that state dependent? Because I know that moving
No,
mobile
that's
homes.
nationwide. That's nationwide.
Okay.
Yeah. And everybody knows it in that industry. So we've been doing this for a long time, over 10 years. We have 1,650 lots right now. We've only had that happen twice
Okay.
in over a decade. Like it doesn't happen. So it doesn't make any sense to stop paying your rent and forfeit a $50,000, $80,000 house. It just doesn't make any sense. So residents pay the rent. This is why during COVID, we collected all of our rent. The whole strategic default that was going on in other real estate, it wasn't happening in mobile home parks because if they don't catch up once the moratorium is done, then they forfeit their home. Well, nobody wants to do that. Also, even though these are considered mobile homes, they're manufactured offsite. They're brought in on 3 axles and they're put in place and they're permanently installed, but they still have the ability to put the axles back on and put the tongue back on and tow them to somewhere else. The challenge is that if you want to move a mobile home, it's about 10 grand. And if it's a double wide, it's about 15 grand. So that doesn't make any sense. So when people move, they do move. Now they don't move as often. Our tenants stay on average about 15 years. And that's what, like 10x apartment building.
Easily.
So you don't have the turnover, like the speed of turnover of residents, but when they move, they sell their home. Last month, the previous owner paid the lot rent. This month, the new owner pays the lot rent. So we don't have that gap. And this is what creates all this stability of income.
Mm.
And then they purchase a home in across the country in another park that they're in the market they're moving to. So it makes way more sense to do that than it does to move a home. And it's expensive. When you take those intrinsics and you look at what kind of properties would you want to own, there's really 3 things that you want to look at in the mobile home park business that matter, especially if you're going to build a business to scale and you want your cash flow to be stable and you want to be able to execute the strategy. It's the quality of the property, the location of the property, and then the regulatory environment in the market. And location, there's going to be more than one thing, but I'll just walk through these. Quality of mobile home parks goes from 1 star to 5 star. 1 star is the park that you can get anything you want, but you don't want to go there at night. Okay, that's
Yeah.
that park, right? And then 5 star is the brand new luxury community. It's gated with full amenities and it's a resort, right?
Mhm.
The opportunity in our view is in the middle. So
Okay.
you can take a 3 star park that's tired, it's been neglected, and it just needs to be brought back to life. And you can build a nice portfolio in that 3 to 4 star space. Two stars, typically they're still decent parks, but they don't have pavement and they've got narrow roads and there's tight density and there's no parking. And you have those kind of things that go on in two-star parks. Three-star parks are going to have paved roads. A lot of times they'll have sidewalks or curbs and gutters. They're going to have nicer homes. They're probably built in the 80s or newer. So there's not a lot of older vintage homes there. They're going to have a lot of times city water, city sewer, or at least if they're on septic, it'll have been recently redone, or at least the underground infrastructure is in good shape. Four-star is going to start being gated, and it's probably just an older five-star park. It's
Okay.
one that was built in the 90s and is showing signs of wear, but still just a really nice place. So you could look at it like A, B, and C class apartments. Five, four, and three-star parks are like that.
Okay.
But three-star parks are more like a C plus B minus apartment.
Okay. Which is
So that's the star rating that they use. And I don't know why they went away from the ABCD, but they just did. And then location, there's a couple things here that matter. One is you don't want to be in a market where the median home value is too low. So
mm,
think in terms of whether your park is full or not. Now, a lot of times when we buy parks, there's a degree of vacancy. So the previous owner didn't finish the job, or maybe some older homes need to be taken out and they need to be replaced with new homes to bring the park up to the new standards. So you have to be able to sell homes. And a brand new single wide mobile home with drywalls, 2x6 construction, granite, stainless, it's 100 grand, 120 installed, right? If the house is outside the park or 200 grand, there's not enough delta for it
mm,
to make sense for someone to come into our park, buy a home and pay the lot rent. Their monthly payment for a $200,000 home outside the park would be the same. So what would be the incentive to not own your land? Amenities. But what we've discovered is if there's a large enough delta, so let's call that a $300,000 residential market, now it makes a lot of sense. Their monthly payment for the home and the lot rent will be substantially less than it would be in a home in that same market. Now they gain the location, so they have good schools for the kids to go to, or if it's a senior park, they have all of the local attractions and stuff, and it's a nice, safe family neighborhood, right? So location matters with respect to the median home value, but it also matters with respect to population growth and job growth. So it doesn't do you a lot of good to buy a great park with vacancy if people are moving out of that market faster than they're moving in,
mhm.
and if job or companies are leaving. We try to focus on markets where there's a high demand for affordable housing and it's a problem there, because then you can always execute your strategy when the market isn't expensive enough and there's substantial demand. And then the last piece of that is regulatory control. So in the affordable housing space, you'll see this happening in a lot of the states in the Northeast, and then you see it in the more blue states on the West Coast, like Colorado and California and Oregon and Washington. There's rent control either being talked about or it's already being initiated. So there again, if you're buying a property from a legacy owner who hasn't raised the rent in 20 years, you could never catch up to the market with rent control.
Mm,
It would be impossible. So it makes sense to avoid that. We want to be in a business where we're being a good steward of our residents. We don't want to be predatory, but we still want the ability to raise rent to the market if it's well behind.
yeah.
That's a lot. That's a big fire hose for you.
No, yeah, that actually helps. So some of it is similar because we own apartments and we own one long-term RV park where we rent part of the land from the lakefront, the river authority. But the back where we own the deeded land, we put mobile homes on it. And
Mhm.
I'm just trying to compare like all the things that we do to kind of what you're talking about. Some of it's similar, some of it's different, even with the long-term RV space, which is probably the closest to mobile homes. But we have a half and half hybrid park. One of the things that we do consider when we're looking at a market is affordability, though, because we are looking at a market that is affordable so that people are moving in. Like it's attracting jobs, it's attracting homeowners because we want it to be a growing kind of a marketplace. And then we want to be as part of that affordability. So it's a tricky needle to thread when you're trying to figure out, okay, we want the median home price to be enough of a delta below what above what this is doing, but then not so much that the area is just not really attracting construction, development, new move-ins. Does that factor into your market selection at all?
Not really. I can appreciate that, but I think that what you'll find is the more expensive the market. So
Mhm.
for us, let's talk about that $120,000 home. That $120,000 home costs $120,000 to install in a $200,000 market. It would
Okay.
still cost $120,000 to install in $1 million market.
Okay.
So, like, we have a park in Carson City, Nevada, which is just outside of Tahoe. Median home values are about 600 there. We could put a $120,000 home in there, and there would be a line of people to sell
Okay.
it because there's so much delta between a regular home and a manufactured home. Like, the more expensive the market, the easier it gets.
Mm.
The challenge that you run into is the institutional buyers have figured that. So go to Denver and try to buy a mobile home park, and you're going to pay like a sub two cap for it. It will be crazy what you'd have to pay to get it.
It's not even worth the cash flow at that point.
Yeah, but that's a covered land play,
Yeah,
like what that is. Like, institutional buyers have a different lens.
that's true.
Most of them, and I know a few guys that are on the acquisition side in that business, and that's a 50-year investment time horizon. They're not buying it for 5 years or 7 years, then exiting. They're building a portfolio of over 100,000 manufactured housing lots in great locations where eventually the land will be worth more than the business. But in the meantime, they get a great stable coupon from owning it. And of course, you owned 100,000 lots, and most of them were purchased prior to the demand for this asset class. The cash flow that you're pulling from those can overcome you paying a three cap for a new, really nice quality asset. You can afford to lose money on that one because you're making so much on the other ones. And then once it catches up to the marketplace, it'll still be a coupon that'll last forever. So I think that's what makes it a little different. Apartments are vertical. You get way more units per acre. Our density is like 10 units per acre. You could get 50 units an acre easy in apartment business, including your parking lots. It's because of that that every mobile home park just controls a large amount of acreage. Most of our parks are like 30 acres. You can imagine what you could do with that in a prime location 50 years from now with redeveloping to condos or apartments. It would be nuts.
Yeah. I interviewed a mobile home park fund manager a couple of weeks ago on the show, and he made the comment. He says they're not making any more. It's like when we were driving down to Scottsdale, we are driving through St. George, Utah, and there were so many tiny home developments, those cute little
Hmm.
park model
Hmm.
mobile homes. And they were really nice neighborhoods, little rooftop decks and lounges. And my husband and I were talking about, if they're not making any more mobile home parks, like, what's this? Like, where does that fall in? And why, first of all, why aren't they making any more? Is that going to change? Because it is some of the best affordable housing that we have, although it is land intensive. Where's the tiny home coming into this business? And is it something that is going to be basically a dying asset? Because you're talking about the redevelopment, going vertical, those types of things with prime locations. Give me the short term with the tiny home movement, the midterm, like what you're talking about, where you can redevelop some of this. What's going to happen in mobile home parks over the next
Yeah, so
10 to 15
tiny homes can be different because those can be deeded,
years?
or they can be kind of like condos where it's deeded. Tiny homes can also be like a version of an RV park. We call it a park model RV park or a permanent resident RV park. But let's zoom out and talk about why they're not making any more of these. First of all, that statement's not true. They are,
Okay.
but it's extremely difficult.
Okay.
Last year in Maricopa County alone, which is the Phoenix metro
Mm.
area, about 10 parks went away. They were knocked over and redeveloped.
Okay.
In the United States of America last year, less than 10 parks were built.
Okay.
Like, they do get built, but it's only the stubborn, persistent owners that build them. They're really difficult to build.
Okay. And
You
are
went
they out in the sticks at that point to develop a new one?
no,
Nobody
yes,
cares.
maybe, but I'll share this with you. It's 2 reasons why. One is economics, and the
Mhm.
other one is NIMBY.
Yeah.
So you're familiar with NIMBY, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, for your audience, not in my backyard. That's an acronym. So when we think of the stereotype of trailer parks, trailer trash, the last thing somebody wants in their neighborhood is the place where you can go get whatever you want, but you don't want to go there at night. They don't want that in their neighborhood. Now, that wouldn't occur if a new one was built, but it's not whether it would or not, it's whether it could. If you get the wrong owner and it becomes a rundown place, they just don't want that in their neighborhood. So that's number one. Number two is the financial part of it. So
Mhm.
when you're purchasing land in a desirable location, you're going to pay more for the land than it would make sense to develop. Like, you could go buy an existing mobile home park that's 80% occupied. Why would you spend the same amount of money for dirt to build one?
Yeah, I
By
wouldn't.
the time you're done with it, you may as well have built something else there. So
Mhm.
that's the other thing. Okay. Then on top of that, you have tax revenue that comes from the property, it goes to the city or the municipality where the property lies. So do the math on this. You take 1 acre of property and then you can multiply that times whatever you want. And you can only fit 10 homes on there in a mobile home park. And your rent is only about $500 a month. And you're going to collect tax on that. Or you could put 50 apartments in there and charge 2,000 a month and you collect tax on that. Now tell me what city official, when they're looking at tax revenue, is going to vote for a mobile home park. Of course, they won't say this, but that's the truth. There's too many forces at work that would negatively impact the development. Let's call it an infill location in a desirable market. So the only parks that get built are built in a more rural location or on the outskirts of a growing city. Most of the new parks are built in Texas.
Mm.
Texas is growing at a rapid pace. And of course, favorable for businesses, favorable for housing, favorable for development. There's so many good things that are happening in Texas. The only thing in Texas that needs to be tamed a bit is the property taxes. They've
Yeah,
just gotten out of control.
yeah.
But otherwise, Texas is very favorable. But the challenges that you run into becomes utilities. When you're in or close enough to a city or you're doing infill, then you get city water, city sewer, and it's easily to solve for utilities. You have 100 to 200 residents that need to hook up to individually to utilities. So you definitely want to have a simple utility solution. And when you go too far outside the city, maybe the zoning is achievable and the land cost is low enough, but now you have to do your own utility solutions.
Mhm.
So all of those pieces are in conflict with more affordable housing being built. So the only way, I mean, it's not the only way, but my view is that the fastest way to achieve additional affordable housing lots is to buy older parks and reposition them. And then you bring those vacant lots back online with brand new homes. And that's what we do.
Is this going to be a continued role in affordable housing? Because it's an issue. We're from Austin. We live in Salt Lake City, massive housing shortages, lots of moving in. And we've definitely seen housing shortages in these hot kind of tech areas. And it's supposed to persist for 10, 15 years. But then you have other markets that are shrinking. And so I'm not sure if my urgency on affordable housing is just because of where we live, because we've basically followed tech for years. Is this gonna continue to be such an issue as a mobile home? Is that part of the solution, or do we need to be looking at other options? How
Part
does
of the
that play a
solution,
role?
but this is a fairly simple answer, Emma. Is the population of the United States growing or shrinking?
Growing.
Growing. Okay, so the housing supply is not. Well, it's certainly not growing at the same pace.
Mhm.
So whether the population is moving around in different markets or not is irrelevant. We have the greatest affordable housing crisis this country has ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't see how it catches up. I just don't see it. Like with the regulatory environment that exists today in markets, like the more expensive the market that you're in, the greater the affordable housing problem is,
Mhm.
but also the greater degree of regulation exists there. So how is that going to solve? Right. So unless regulation starts to peel back, which hopefully with this new administration, that's part of it. But still the cost of land, labor, materials is so high. It's almost impossible to build traditional affordable housing. You just can't
Mhm.
do it. Yes, manufactured homes are part of the solution, but I don't see how it happens at scale. So that tiny home thing will probably be a piece of that solution. People
Mhm.
living in RVs will probably be a solution. Those developments happen at a greater degree than mobile homes do. So if for every one mobile home park that gets built, probably 10 new RV parks get built. So there's far less restriction. It's easier to do it. It's faster to fill it up. You still have the transient nature of the
Mhm.
income or maybe seasonal nature of the income.
It's more like a hotel.
Yeah. But that's still another business. We've owned RV parks. We've decided to stay in the permanent housing space
Mhm.
because the income is more stable. COVID taught us that lesson. We had a park go from 97% occupied to 40 in 2 weeks. Yeah. So that's a stinger. But I still think RVs is a great temporary solution. You
Mhm.
buy a mobile home park that's 50% vacant, so you can't fill them all and sell them all at once while you're doing a rolling sales program fill
Mhm.
those spaces, you can temporarily gain RV income on the rest of them.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
we
we
do.
lived in our RV for something like, I wanna say 9 or 10 months, something like that. Park situation was out of control. Just being able to find a place, and then nobody wants you staying for more than 30 days. It was a really tough situation just finding places to go because, like, we wanted to be in certain locations for a couple of months, right? And we just have to keep calling all the time, "Hey, you have any openings?" And the best ones, I'm like, "We could rent an apartment for this lot rent." That doesn't even
Yeah.
include our truck and our RV. So we, as full-time travelers, have definitely bumped up against that affordable housing problem. And we've also bumped up against it with our young adult children. We've got 6 kids. The oldest is 26 and she's looking for a job right now. She just graduated at mechanical engineering and she's terrified. She's finding jobs right now is oddly difficult. There's something broken in the hiring process. We've got a couple of other kids who are job hunting and they're like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to afford a house. But an RV is not the answer because you can't find long-term RV parks. Ours technically isn't even long-term. They're unskirted. They have to be moving, they have to be somewhere else for a month of the year, have another permanent address. It's rough. So I don't know where this is going for. And you have a large family too. Like, how are they coping with this?
Only one of ours has moved out.
Okay.
So we have 7, and our youngest is 8, and we only have 1 moved out. So
Okay.
we still have a full house.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just
Some
waiting
of
when your house is full of adults.
yeah, some of them pay rent, and there it's say, "Dad, it's cheaper for me to pay rent here than
Yeah.
it is for me to go get an apartment." Yeah, it's expensive out there. It is
Yeah.
like if we look back to our youth, I bought my first house for 70,000 bucks, and the interest rates were probably like 8%. I was
Mhm.
making like 15 bucks an hour or 12 bucks an hour, something
You
like
can
that.
afford a house.
And I could afford a house, no problem.
Yep.
And when it got a little tight, I just got a renter in one of the extra bedrooms. But yeah, today, I can't imagine it. The
No.
entry level house is 3 or 400 grand in the market that we live in.
Yeah.
And then the interest rates are like 7. That's probably why you don't see youth buying houses.
It's interesting. It creates an opportunity though for the limited partner, the passive investor. I don't want another RV park. I do not want a mobile home park. Like I'm all about passive income, travel full time. The work that we want to do is not managing properties, right? So this does create a really unique situation for somebody like me who I want a piece of the mobile home park market from affordable housing and impact investing. I feel like you mentioned that it can be very predatory. So it creates an opportunity to do some passive impact investing. What are we looking for with an operator to know that they're not going to be a predatory type of owner? What does predatory look like, and how can you recognize it so that you can find somebody who's doing the opposite?
Great question. First of all, in the manufactured housing sponsor world, there's not very many of them. So it's not like apartments where there's one on every corner. It's a limited niche. We're one of the top 100 owners in the United States, and we only own 1,650 lots.
Okay.
And then, of course, most of the owners larger than us are institutional capital. But I think to zoom out, the most important to get right in any passive investment is the people,
Okay.
without question. If you were Bernie Madoff 2.0, even if you have a great real estate backing or great architecture behind your investments, you're still going to take advantage of somebody.
Mm,
So it's really important to get the people right. I think it's the most important thing. I think that it's intelligent, especially if you're investing with somebody that's doing this to scale, that they're vertically integrated. They
okay.
have all their own internal property management, construction. They can handle everything, and leaning on a third party that's take advantage of them and not have the same vested interest.
Yeah.
I think it's valuable to select a sponsor who uses third party administration. In other words, there's a neutral referee in the middle. They're the ones managing the cash flow, managing the waterfall, reporting the truth of what's happened. They do all the books.
Mhm,
They really keep the potential for Ponzi schemes and skimming and cooking the books and like even human error. They just
mhm.
eliminate all of those things. We
We
chose to go that direction because it's simple. Like we don't want to
it
build a whole back office staff that's doing that function. That's 6 people.
to I don't think this is a topic we've dived into on the show before. So, let's talk about that a little bit because, again, when we're at, like, a third-party due diligence conference, right, there's a lot of talk about transfer agents, third-party fund management. I don't think that's typical in the I don't wanna call it mom and pop, but, like, the sub-institutional syndication space. They're usually managing their own fund and managing their own money coming in. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like and what kinds of questions the passive partner should be asking to find out how their fund is administered?
Yeah, typically, if somebody's on their first fund, you probably won't see it.
Mhm.
Or let's say somebody syndicated 3 or 4 deals, you probably won't see it. So it's something that gets added when you get to scale. So for us, we got to a spot where the snowball effect that occurs when you have too many investment offerings was driving the challenge. Reporting started, instead of taking a day, it took a week.
Okay.
So we started to outsource and do that because we wanted to be able to scale, and we could just see the writing on a wall. I'm going to give you 4 more of these, and then I'm going to be, that's my whole job. So and then I think that the added value is that when you add third party fund administration, they give you an investor portal, transparency. They provide user interface. All the documents are in one place, a secure login. You're not just relying on a sponsor to do this on spreadsheets and then have it in some Dropbox file or something. So the technology is much more favorable to both the LP and the GP. They provide the fund level accounting experience on a day-to-day basis. They help redemptions, transfers, or liquidations, or issue that exists with one of the LPs inside of the investment vehicle. They track every dollar from the day that it arrives, as manage all of that. They put together the distributions of cash flow, whether that's monthly or quarterly, depending on the investment. They manage the return of capital, calculate the profits, and distribute those. They work directly with the third party accountant who does the investor K on things like the cost seg reports and the bonus depreciation. So there's just so much function that those guys, or that say guys, it's the group that we work with for a bunch of guys, but that fund, that third party offers. But I think the most important thing to the investor is they get a P&L, they get a balance sheet, and they get a neutral third party telling the truth.
Okay. On the fund specifically, not
That's right.
necessarily the
That's
actual
right.
deal. So
Yeah, but they're actually down in the deal level looking at the
mhm,
books there too,
mhm,
because all of that rolls up to the fund. So maybe they're not reporting specifically on the property level. We do that ourselves. Like that's
mhm.
our job. But they're still looking in there to make sure that everything is capitalized or expensed, that it's the right chart of accounts, and there's not something like what's going on here. I think another thing that's a little bit ancillary, Emma, that very few people think about. Say you find a great sponsor. They're amazing at everything they do, great communicators, ones on times, distributions like clockwork. I'm bragging, but anyways,
Yeah, people have
like
fun
all
one
of that
time.
stuff, right? You got great cash flow. It goes up all the time, very accessible, all the things you'd be looking for in a sponsor, and then they die in a plane crash. Now
Mm,
what? So
okay.
now your dollars are exposed. Now, maybe this wouldn't be as bad in like an industrial investment or something like that. But in a mobile home park, which very few people know anything about, now you get a receiver that comes in. They have no clue what they're doing. Their job is just simply to liquidate to get the LP capital out. That's their job. You're probably going to get 70 cents on the dollar with respect to what you should have gotten. So a neutral party fund administrator, if it's architected correctly, like we have a succession plan that says if my business partner Nate and I die in a plane crash, or we both become incapacitated such that we can no longer be a good steward of this investment capital, here's what happens. We've already pre-selected more than one responsible manufactured housing to run their business just like we do.
Okay.
Like we know they use EOS and they have goal oriented structure and they understand it, right? So instead of a receiver coming in, they come in, and we're doing this for our offspring too. Like our children would receive only 70 cents on the dollar
Yeah.
for whatever the GP side of it is. So there's things that are so ancillary that most people don't consider. I joke around about this, but it's true. The smaller the check, the more skewed the evaluation. So you think about a $25,000 check. What do they ask? They want to double it as
You wanna
fast,
double it?
right? So like, how much can I make and how soon can I get my money? The larger the check, and let's talk about high net worth or family office or something of that nature. How much tax benefit can you give me? And how can we never sell?
Yeah.
They're
That's
way
true.
different, right?
It's very different.
But they also will ask questions like, Jack, what happens if you die? Do you and your partner have key man life insurance? What if you both die? Where I don't want to get stuck there. I want a programmatic relationship where I invest with you over and over again. And I want to know that my capital is being well taken care of,
Mhm.
even if you guys pass away. So what's your succession plan? So not only do most LPs not think of that, GPs don't either.
Yeah. There should be something in the and this is why we give you the operating agreement when you're looking into investing in a fund and you're
Mhm.
reading over the PPM, includes a copy of the operating agreement. So you can check these things at the fund level. Like, what is the succession plan? There should be, you should have you personally as a limited partner, because it should have kind of a, I don't want to say checklist because I think that reduces it down to this is something you can formulaically do or rather than looking at everything as a whole. That's somewhat of a checklist to make sure that these companies are structured correctly. Oh, and to that point, when you mentioned vertical integration and then you mentioned third party administration, what should be vertically integrated and what should be delegated?
Hold on just a second. I need my charger, so I had to ask my assistant to bring my charger. It that's probably a nuanced question, but if you're in any part of your business that's intensive, it should be
Mhm.
vertically integrated.
Okay.
So in the mobile home park space, the management is more intensive than anything else.
Yeah.
Home sales. So because we have vacant spaces or we have vacant park-owned homes that need to be renovated and sold, like most real estate, you're renting the units, you're not selling them. So since home sales is such a integral part of this business, that should be vertically integrated. You should be able to pull the levers there. If you do intensive construction on every project, that should also be vertically integrated. Like
Okay.
anything where you have to pull the levers all the time, you'd be better off pulling the levers yourself than you would be using a
Okay.
third party. That's the way we approach it. Everything that matters. Plus, it allows you to scale. Whereas if you're using a third party and they say, sorry, we're overwhelmed, we can't do this anymore for you. Now you can't add any more properties.
Yeah.
And that also goes on the capital side. So our ability to scale capital is because we have a great third party administrator. If we didn't, that would have to be vertically integrated as well. So we chose to go that way because it offers transparency. And then I don't want to build that back office function.
Yeah.
I'm a real estate guy. I want to stay focused on real estate.
Okay. So stay in your lane. It's like the same way that we have farm out like lawyers or accountants because they have special certifications. But there's a lot of stuff that we choose not to do in house. So it was a very interesting discussion, like what should be vertical and what should not, based on the best interest of the investor. And it gets expensive. Like the more layers of corporate or management that you have, the more expensive it's going to be. And it tends to eat into investor returns. How do you keep your corporate level expenses low enough so it doesn't eat into investor returns? Because most the larger a fund gets, the higher their expense ratios get and the lower returns they tend to generate. Does that really come with less risk? How do you keep it in control so that your investors are still getting market level returns that they could get with a smaller company but that has less layers of management?
Yeah, so this it goes back to that conversation about the sponsor. That's a sponsor who's gotten to the level where they're fully vertically integrated. Did they use institutional capital and just go there day one?
Mm.
Or did they bootstrap it and work their fool heads off to get there? It's hard, Emma, to go from one deal and then try to vertically integrate. Doesn't work. You don't have
Mhm.
enough. What we've discovered is if the sponsors are taking every dollar that comes into their company and buying yachts and airplanes with it, they're never going to grow.
Okay.
They'll never get there, right? We have people at our firm, quite a few, that make more money than the owners do.
Yeah.
Really good talent is expensive. It's hard to find. And when you find it, you got to pay them really well and make sure that they enjoy their experience so that they'll stay. Your business, the growth or the ability to scale your business is only as good as the people. And that takes time. Initially, as Emma, you wear 10 hats and then you get your portfolio large enough to where there's enough cash flow that's not dilutive to the LPs that allow you to hire somebody. And now you wear 9 hats and
Yeah.
then that keeps going. Right. So we've been in this business for at this flag about 9 years, but overall, like in mobile home parks for over a dozen years. And I still wear 5 hats. That's just how it is. But we're growing. Every time you scale and you can grow your portfolio, you don't need to hire a director of property operations for every property you buy. You only need
Mhm.
one for every 20 properties you own. So when you get to that level where you have really good senior level management, then you're probably in a spot where you can wear less hats. But that's
Yeah.
a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah. One thing I do like about the mobile home park model that kind of goes to speaking about like motivations of the owners is that because they're effectively not making any more, it's not a churn and burn type of game. You're much more long-term minded because you're not living off the acquisition fees, trying to just value add and sell. It's like every time you sell one, you're like, oh, why did we sell that? They're not making anymore. And so it changes the focus to a very long-term outlook, and acquisition is not the name of the game. It's execution and appropriate management.
For sure. And I think that's the other thing too is the strategy, at least for us, it's pivoted. Some of the early properties that we purchased, we wouldn't purchase today. And we've held them for 7, 8, 9 years. And we'll probably exit some or all of those because they're
Mhm.
just not an appropriate fit. And it's because they're too small or they're in a location that's too far out of the markets that we want to be in. Still be very profitable, but I think that you hit the nail on the head on two fronts. Manufactured housing, not making any more, so it's a scarcity conversation. And if you get a good one, it's irreplaceable.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the tax benefits in mobile home parks are so superior that once you've taken them, you don't want to recapture event. And it's a difficult wrestling match, Emma. The sponsor's motivation is to sell it so he can take the promote. How do you align investor interests so that the LP's desire to not pay tax, in other words, keep it forever, aligns with the sponsor's interests? And you just have to get creative to solve for that. So the truth is, I don't want to pay taxes either. I'd like to own these as long as possible, like into my retirement years, potentially own them until I pass away and then the children get stepped up basis and all that fun stuff. But that's the secret sauce, and we figured that out. So most of our large check writers, on our view, $300,000 and above is large check writer. So they're focused more on taxes than anything else.
Okay.
Our direct investments are only open to that size check, 300,000 or larger. And
Mhm.
there's different economics for different check sizes. That's the way that we approached it. And our retail investors can still get exposure to the same properties, but they don't have a legacy hold option. It's 5 to 7 years, and their interest will be redeemed at the market value that they're worth on that day. So we've just bifurcated our business through all the years of experience. We bifurcated it by investor behavior. So it's not by asset type or investment type, it's by behavior type. It's a kind of a broad stroke, but what we've discovered is large checks think like large checks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And small checks usually things like small checks, but there's occasions where that's not the case.
Mhm.
So yeah, our business really separates it by check size, but we still get exposure to the same legacy hold properties. It's just that some are forever and some are for 5 to 7 years.
Yes. I think small checks tend to be more of a short-term focus. It reminds me of a developer who told me that he does 2 syndications for every property. One for the people who are looking to high roll, the risk of the upfront development, all the unknowns, and then he will sell that property into another syndication that has he called them coupon clippers. People who just want to be in it for the cash flow long term, more preservation of wealth, enough growth to outpace inflation and offset taxes, that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, that's when investor behavior, like you said, first became something that I realized, oh, it's like people are like, depends on your goals, but a new investor doesn't know what their goals are, what those options are. And so being able to say, what would you rather have? And we have an option for you either way. I think that's unique what you're doing in the space there.
Yeah, it was just a discovery that we made. And our fund administrator helped us with that discovery. He said, Jack, let's look at your investors and let me tell you about them.
Yes.
And he said, I can see all your transfers and all your issues that you deal with and all your stuff. It's always with these 100,000 or $50,000 checks.
Mhm.
It's never with the $1 million check. So
It's
your
true.
time and your exposure to administrative tasks are just simply less when you have less investors, but they become substantially less when the behavior is different. And that's where we started to discover that it's not 250, it's 300. We have a lot of
Mhm.
investment advisors that we work with, and they say the same thing as they're building their book of business. The break happens at 300 grand. I don't know if that's psychological or what it is, but the $100,000 person can see themselves writing a $250,000 check, but 300 is too big for whatever reason. And the $1 million investor who wants to be co-invested alongside people that think like he doesn't want the $250,000 guy. He wants the 300,000 because he knows they'll think like he does. I don't know why that is, but that's where the break occurs. So that's how we've built bifurcation in the behavior inside of our
Mhm.
investors.
Yeah, it's so good. And this is why you need to listen to the end of the podcast because we're like almost an hour in, and then something like that comes up for the LP to be asking yourself the question, what kind of investor do you want to be? what kind of behavior, what your goals are driven, like that's gold right there. And like I said, somewhat unique in the space. So, yes, just to wrap it up, tell us a little bit about yourself on a personal level, like your own passive income journey. I always like to hear from people who are generating passive income for others. We understand how important it is, right? That then that we push this, hey, you want a passive income lifestyle, you pay all your bills with great cash flow and you want to be able to do work that really matters without being worried about how much money it makes, those types of things. Like, how does that play out in your own life? And especially, I love that you have a large family. You come from a large family. We have the same problem. We have 6 kids. We're both from families of 8. So now we've got 32 basically siblings on those side. And then we've got the spouse, the kids. Our kids aren't even married yet. The grandchildren thing, I can't wait for grandkids, right? But at the point where I'm like, how am I going to manage all of this? A business, and all of these between aunts, uncles, cousins, grandkids, it's out of control, a couple hundred people, and I sometimes feel like I just don't have the emotional capacity to deal with all of the investors, all of the business partners, and then I don't really have a lot of personal relationships. How do you manage that in your own life? And how are you able to say, "Hey, I need my own passive income," and building your business to the point where you don't have to be working for money your entire life. You're always gonna be working, but working for money is a little different.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
First
Do
of all, I don't see that as the problem. So, like you, I came from a family of 17. My wife comes from a family of 12. So, all the in laws and outlaws, that's 100 people. It gets nuts.
Mhm.
And then we have 7 of our own, 6 still living at home. I think there's a bit of a forcing function. So,
Mm.
imagine building a business, and we have about 35 employees right now. That'll probably grow 3x that by the time we get to our retirement years.
Mhm.
I think that living in an environment with a lot of people and managing all the different emotions and expectations and responsibilities that come with it prepare you to scale a business.
Mm.
So to some degree, that's a blessing. I also think for certain it's motivation. If we didn't have 7 hungry mouths, maybe I wouldn't have been as
You gotta
motivated.
think bigger with a bigger
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. And then I think that if I look at this kind of backwards from a cash flow perspective, my view is I want to build a stable portfolio for our investor partners. One where our residents have an amazing experience, like the best experience living in a manufactured housing community for the market that they live in. If I do that well, without question, I won't have any cash flow issues. I
Okay.
will not. So today, we roll all of our cash flow that we earn as the general partner back into our business. So we're Midwestern boys by birth, Nate and I. He's an Indiana boy. I was a Minnesota boy.
Nice.
I grew up in a living upstairs above the bakery that my dad ran.
Mm.
Walked to school, little small town, Minnesota. Nate grew up in Indiana. His parents were school teachers. So he was like changing out hot water heaters in their rental property. They had a bunch of little apartments and stuff. So we grew up in the business.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel like that humble beginnings has led us to where we roll all of our cash flow. We could live on a limited budget. Obviously, we still like to take our family on a vacation every year and those kind of things. But don't buy a yacht,
Yeah.
buy an airplane, roll your capital back into the business. So our employees have the greatest experience they can, and we can afford to hire really good talent.
Mm.
Cannot scale this business without great people. It's not just the sponsors, it's their whole team. If they don't have really good staff surrounding them, they can't scale. And that means when they're buying the new property, they won't be able to pay attention to the one that you're invested in. So
Yeah.
it's really important that they have a great team if they're scaling.
Yeah.
There's one last thing that you mentioned earlier that I didn't expand upon, and that was the vulture nature in this
Oh,
industry.
yes.
When you purchase a mom and pop park, many times they haven't raised the rent in a decade or more.
Mm.
So the rent could be in nominal dollars, $300-400 behind the market.
Okay. That's a lot.
There are, and that's they might only be paying 300 or 400 that day. So it's essentially doubling the rent. A lot of times those owners have also neglected the property. So it's
Mhm.
in some state of disrepair. They can't sell homes because the park's kind of ugly.
Yeah.
When they can't sell the mobile homes that are vacant because they haven't put any money into fixing them up.
And they're
Whole
terrified to
animal.
raise the rent because people might move out, and then they'll have even
That's
less.
right. So there's a great opportunity there if it's in the right location and it has the right bones. But the last thing that you want to do is go raise the rent 2x what it was when you purchased it the day that you purchased the property. Okay, there are vultures that do that. And that's both in the professional space, but also in the institutional space. They don't care. They're big enough to where the headline risk doesn't matter to them. So for us, we want to be good stewards in all things in our life. And I think this kind of aims at being more purpose focused. Someday I'm going to have to answer for what I've done. How are my residents going to talk about me? How are my investors going to talk about me? How is my family going to talk about me? How are strangers going to talk about Jack Martin? So to me, like that's really important way of doing this is let's go make an impact in their lives on a positive nature first. In other words, let's fix their roads because they're full of potholes. And then let's inch their rent towards the market one bite. And then let's go provide some amenities and let's inch their rent next year a little bit more. So we take a lot more measured approach where we want
Mhm.
to give value first and then ask them to give back. And eventually we end up with the same net result. We have moved our rents to the market, but we have a great relationship with our residents. And
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for. We want to own these parks as legacy assets. So the last thing you want to do is create conflict between your residents and your management.
Yeah, and we call that a whitewash. We'll do that on buildings that are very vacant because same reasons, but maybe it's like 40% vacancy. We'll go ahead and do a whitewash on that. And I think that usually has a net economic benefit because you can get this turned over very quickly, get new residents in who are paying more, and it ends up costing less money in the long run. But when people are already living there, ooh, a whitewash, I just think is unethical because it's very disruptive. And especially when you're buying a property where they're paying very low rent, they usually can't afford anywhere else because they're putting up with this property that's going to seed, and they're one step away from couch surfing sometimes. And so that personally really bugs me when you go in and whitewash a low end property to reposition it quicker because it has a better economic outcome. But the people, they don't have anywhere else to go.
I like to sleep good at night as well.
Yeah.
And doing the right thing when nobody is looking seems like it's a lost character trait
Mm.
in a lot of commercialized game of money.
Yeah.
It
Well,
becomes about the dollar and less about the people.
I've seen some large families, they become very internal, almost insular. Imma take care I have a big family, I need to take care of my own first, and it almost makes them a little bit selfish. But I've also seen the opposite where some large families is, "I would never want something to happen like this to our family or our children to be in this position, and so I'm going to be that good in the world." I don't think you can predict that based on somebody's family size. It you just have to get to know their family values, and they say really great things about their own family. I hear that a lot, but I'm not hearing as much about helping other people's families, and that to me is a big red flag that I watch for.
Yeah, it sounds like a condition of heart. And I don't know if I know a lot of large families. We come
Mhm.
from a religious background where everybody had a large family. So it's very familiar with it. And I see both ends of the spectrum with what you're talking about. But it seems like to some degree, the character traits or the attitudes of the parents gets passed down to the children. So if their parents have a big ego, the children's kind of adopt a big ego and so forth. If the parents are humble and kind, typically the children are too. So I don't know where it stems from, but you're right. It seems like there is a little bit of familiarity within the family, the familial thing.
Yeah, and we were joking yesterday, my husband and I took our daughter's dog to the dog park, and we are like, "Hey, look, there are other dogs over there," and he was not interested in playing with the other dogs. They'd come over and he'd get real nervous, and he'd go off by himself and come over to us, and I said, Has he always been like this, or did he learn this from our kids? This is not genetic, this is a dog."
Oh,
They
I
picked that
think
up.
dogs can be another family member and take on. They can.
It was really strange to see our parenting style reflected in the dog. It was an eye opener. For unfortunately, our kids are a little too old now. We can't go back and unring that social awkwardness bell, but it's really fun to chat about how that impacts your business. And to your point, having to think bigger because you have 7 mouths to feed. I've seen a huge amount of that in our own. It's almost like if you live on a farm, you're going to increase your physical ability. You're going to become more muscular and more able to move heavy loads because you're catching bales of hay and hauling feed sacks. And the more time you spend doing that difficult work, the easier it gets and the more capacity you have to do things that are even more difficult. I feel like it's the same thing with mental and emotional energy. We have large families, which stresses our ability to service all of those relationships. But in the attempt to do it, we increase our capacity just the same way that you do at the gym. And
For sure.
sometimes you feel like you're not doing it well, but you're always improving.
Yeah, for sure. It's the ability to manage relationships is also like a muscle.
Yes.
So somebody who manages a lot of relationships every single day, managing 9, it's easy.
Yeah.
I have hundreds of investors. I still make time for them.
Hmm.
We do some personal time discipleship with young men, and I still find time for that.
Hmm.
So it's a muscle that you just use all the time. And if somebody lived in a world where it was just them and one other person, they would be so overwhelmed being dropped into that.
Yes.
I'm just
Yes.
used to it.
I ran into a lady one time. She was pregnant with her 11th child. And I think I had, I don't know, maybe five at the time. And I said, "I don't know how you do it with 11. I can barely handle the 5 that I've got." And she just said, "Stop right there." She said, "I cannot believe you just said that." She says, "How many times has a mother of 2 or 3 said to you, 'I don't know how you do it with 5. I can barely handle the 2 or 3 I have.'" She said, "I handle 10 and now 11 the same way that you handle 5, one at a time, one day at a time, and sometimes not very well."
Have you found that as your oldest ones get to where they can be big helpers, it actually gets way easier than it initially was?
To a certain respect, I think when my kids were teenagers is when all of that Duggar controversy came out. And so I was very self aware of making sure that I was not putting more on the older kids than was reasonable, I wanted their experience to be more like growing up in a smaller family, like they were the focus. So what I tended to do instead is I would focus on the older ones' education and career development. The rest of them just played. Right, but I did have the babysitting probably the best tip I ever got was from a mom, her kids were a little bit older than mine. She said, "When we leave," they had 4 children. She says, "My oldest son watches the youngest one because he's the oldest and this is the most dangerous, and then the 2 middle boys watch each other, like, the older boy watches the younger boy." She goes, "And we pay them to watch the one younger." So they're paying the 2 older boys to watch the 2 younger boys, and they all have their split responsibilities. And I thought, "Oh, that really works well." I think the Duggars did something similar where each kid had, like, a buddy and they would go and I like that idea, but I just really wanna make sure that we weren't putting too heavy of a burden on the older kids. So,
Oh,
yes, it's
they love
easier,
it.
but
I
had
think
to make
they
sure I didn't go too
absolutely
far.
love it. They love
Yeah.
getting, "Oh, mom just gave me responsibility."
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Andrea doesn't do near what I mean, all the kids wash their own clothes. They all fold their own clothes.
Mhm.
The dishes, floors, windows, like all of that's done. The kids know what their jobs are.
Yes.
And Andrea homeschools our children,
Yep. Same.
which we started about like COVID-ish. And they all know exactly what they're supposed to do every day. She only participates when they get stuck or on specific like new subjects or where they need some tutoring. Once they learn how to read, like they're
'Cause
self-sufficient. You'd be surprised how fast they grow up and how independent they become when
Mhm.
you give them responsibility.
Yes.
No more surprised than you would if you spoiled them and did everything for them, they wouldn't do anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground between doing everything for them and making them do everything. And I
Mhm.
think large families can tend to fall prey to the side of doing everything for them. But I did hear something interesting recently, and to kind of get us back onto the business and finance part of this, that the largest families tend to be the poorest and the wealthiest individuals, like middle income, middle class people tend to not have large families because on the poor side, it's throw another kid on the mattress on the floor, right? No big deal. And on the wealthier side, they're like, we can buy a bigger car, we can buy a bigger house, we can afford to take the entire family on these nicer vacations. But it's the middle ones who are like, we're going to run out of space in this house. We're going to run out of space in this car. So large
Mhm.
families tend to be very polarized on income. Have you noticed that as well?
I haven't. Yeah. So I just grew up in an environment where everybody had large families.
Yeah,
Well, I got 50 cousins or 100 cousins. I don't even know half of them.
I know.
Yeah. So it's just I don't know anything different.
Yeah.
But what I do know is I look at across our family, I have 16 siblings,
Hmm.
and they're all very independent, productive. And that was the way we were raised.
Yeah.
We were raised like, hey guys, this is takes a village, man. Everybody's got to do their part. And I think that just became something you're used to. So really strong work ethic was instilled at an early age. And I'm still riding on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you don't choose the size of the family that you're born into, but I can certainly look back and be grateful for the experience.
Definitely. I'm the 7th of 8 kids in my family, and I had a very different experience growing up than my older siblings did, and that was really interesting for me to watch because my parents the stories for one before I was born the way that they were, but I got to watch the same thing in my husband's family because he's one of the older kids. And so I came into the family when they were still raising kids, and I saw the kind of the same transition into a completely different person, a completely different parent for those younger kids. and that amount of personal development that they went through, that I heard about my parents going through and then watched my in-laws going through, and then myself included now that we have our youngest is almost 13. And I feel that amount of personal development has influenced my entrepreneurship journey in the same way you said. It prepares you not only to scale by just the management of spinning all the plates, but it also prepares you in a way that all the personal development you have to do as a parent, as a good partner, and also as an entrepreneur, it all goes together. You can't really separate out those activities. So I'm sure we could talk about this one all day, but these kinds of character things that you're talking about are how you evaluate the people you want to do business with as well. There has to be a technical competency, but also a match on character and values. And having these conversations is very important before you're going to partner with someone or invest with somebody as a limited partner. As one last question before we wrap it up, I always ask our guests to describe the ideal person that you would want to reach out to you after the show and then tell them how to get a hold of you.
So there's two avatars. One is retail, checks between 100 and 250, interested in tax benefit of
Mm,
fairly substantial nature. That's going to be in the calendar year where the investment takes place. A coupon somewhere in the 4 to 10% range, depending on how long the asset is held. And then an overall return somewhere in the mid teens. That's typically what that would look like. And then the other avatar is 300 to a million. And some of our investors do more than that, but that's the standard. A little bit better economics,
mhm.
direct investment instead of through a fund. Cash flow and yield would be a little bit better because the economics are better. But then the focus really is legacy hold. We're going to own these for a long period of time. We'll do refinance events at intervals and return capital. So eventually all of your capital will be back in your pocket. But the intention is to focus on tax strategy and let's own these until like refi till you die, that kind of attitude there.
Yeah.
So those are the two avatars. I mean, we also have a shorter term debt fund that's a private credit instrument that's coming out this year. It's not live yet, but that's a little bit more of a monthly coupon, probably appropriate for like self-directed IRAs and those kind of things.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, similar. And so if you like what you heard, how do they invest with you, Jack?
They go to 5210.com. That's the number 52, and then 10 is spelled out. So it's 52ten.com. Go to the contact page, fill out a form there, and then you'll get an invitation to get on my calendar directly from me.
Yep. And I always say one of the selfish reasons I do this podcast is so I can meet people that our fund might want to fund. So when you're talking about the avatar of the 300 to a million, you're talking to people like me where we're managing a fund. We're looking for co-investing or
Hmm.
co-management situation, direct investors. And then we're able to find great operators. And this is like step one of evaluating, yeah, do we want to look into this relationship first, like a first date almost? And so if you, as a listener, like what you hear, let's invest together. Reach out. You do with me at investwithemma.com. We can jump on a calendar. I can introduce you to any of the investors that we have. But our goal is to hopefully bring on some of the guests into our own fund where you mentioned the better economics. That's our goal is to negotiate better economics, not just for our fund, but so we can then pass that through to the investor. And if we bring somebody in, we should be able to outperform what that investor can do directly. And so these kinds of, like you said, collaborative relationships are how we're able to bring either more people together as a pooled fund to write a larger check versus say, I just have $1 million that I want to put in one deal as a retail investor. So these are the kinds of relationships that, like I said, I selfishly like to discover or uncover by doing this show. So I would love more information about investing with you as well. So let's be sure we trade that after the show and appreciate you coming on and spending your time with us and chit chatting
Emma,
about that
thank
person.
you so much for inviting me. It's rare that I get to jump on a podcast and talk about real estate with somebody from a family of your size.
I know it's unusual. Even when I grew up, it was weird. They'd be like, "All from the same parents? Like, on purpose?" Like, yeah, I know. It's weird.
Mhm.
It's nice to hear you grew up in a community where it was a little bit more normalized. But all right. Would love to have you reach out after the show. Again, this is why we do this is to develop relationships, not just with each other, but also with you as an investor. Jump on a call and let's start getting some investing done so you can have more passive income and you can live the lifestyle that you choose, not the one that's dictated by how much money you earn. All right. Thanks. Until next week.
Thanks, Emma.